Betrayal rarely announces itself with a slamming door or a screaming match. In my experience, it crept in through the back quietly, wearing ordinary things as its disguise. A phone turned face down on the kitchen counter. Longer showers that steamed up the mirror before I'd even poured my morning coffee. New passwords on devices I once shared freely. And those smiles, the private, quick ones Savannah flashed at her phone before she set it face down again, explaining it away as something a neighbor said in the group chat. I told myself I was overthinking. I was good at that. Solving problems, finding rational explanations, trusting the math of 11 years together. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party when we were both still young enough to believe love was simple. I was drawn to Savannah immediately, her warmth, the way she laughed without caring who heard, the confidence she wore like a second skin. She told me later that what she'd loved about me was how dependable I was. Dependable. I used to think that was a compliment. Now I turn the word over in my mouth like a stone. I'm an electrical engineer for a regional construction firm. My world operates on systems, inputs, outputs, predictable reactions. I'm quiet and practical, the kind of man who fixes things without making a scene. Savannah stopped working 2 years into our marriage. She said she wanted to complete online qualifications and eventually launch an interior design business. I supported her without question, paid the mortgage, funded 3 separate courses she never finished, never once pressured her to contribute financially. I believed in her. That was my first mistake, not the belief itself, but the way I never once asked her to earn it. We had no children. Every time I raised it, Savannah shifted the horizon forward. Next year, after the renovation, once things settle, I understand now what those delays really meant. Children would have tied her more completely to a life she was already quietly auditing for an exit. From the outside, our suburban home looked like a postcard. We watched television on weekends, hosted neighborhood barbecues in summer, met friends for dinner on Friday nights. Our closest neighbor was Tom, my best friend since college, 2 houses down the same quiet street. He'd been at our wedding. He'd helped me lay the patio in the backyard. If I'm honest, Tom knew both of us better than almost anyone. The marriage had grown emotionally quiet. I want to be clear about that because I've asked myself 1,000 times since whether I missed something I should have seen. But quiet isn't the same as broken. Savannah still kissed me goodbye before I left for work. She still slept beside me. We still talked about the bathroom renovation we were going to do the following spring. I mistook routine for permanence. I mistook her staying for her choosing. That Saturday morning started like every other. I was on my second coffee when the knock came at the front door. Tom was standing on the porch, and the expression on his face stopped me cold. It wasn't the easy look of a man dropping by to borrow something. It was the look of someone who had spent the night working up the nerve to say something he wished he didn't have to say. "Come for a walk with me," he said, "without Savannah." I made a joke, something about hoping nobody had died. Tom didn't laugh. He just turned and walked toward the sidewalk, and I set down my coffee and followed. We walked for nearly half a mile without speaking. I matched Tom's pace and didn't push him because the silence itself was already telling me something I wasn't ready to hear. He took us off the main street and down the path that runs along the old drainage creek, stopping finally beneath the wide oak tree where we used to sit on summer evenings years ago, back when the neighborhood felt like it belonged to us. Tom pulled out his phone with the reluctance of a man delivering a verdict he hadn't asked to deliver. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been awake since Thursday night trying to decide what to do. Then he turned the screen toward me. It was a dating profile. The photographs were recent, I could tell by her hair, the length she'd kept it since last autumn. She was wearing a blouse I didn't recognize, standing in a restaurant I'd never been to, and she was smiling the way she used to smile at me. The profile said she was single, child-free, spontaneous, looking for discreet meetings, no expectations, no strings, and the account had been active that very morning, while I thought she was in the shower. My first instinct was to construct an explanation. Maybe it was a fake account, identity theft, an old profile she'd forgotten to delete. I said all of those things out loud to Tom, and I could hear how hollow they sounded even as I said them. Tom pointed at the screen without speaking. The profile mentioned our neighborhood cafe by name. One of the photographs was taken inside our bedroom. I recognized the print on the wall above the dresser. The one Savannah had picked out on a trip we took to the coast 3 years ago. Tom told me how he'd found it. A single coworker had matched with the profile, then recognized Savannah from a barbecue at our house the previous summer. He'd shown Tom. Tom had sat on it for 2 days. I wanted to walk home immediately. I could feel the anger rising like something physical, like pressure behind my eyes. I wanted to stand in our kitchen and say her name and watch her face when I showed her what I'd seen. Tom grabbed my arm. He told me exactly what would happen if I did that. Savannah would delete the account before I finished the sentence. She'd cry. She'd say it was nothing, a stupid mistake, a moment of weakness, or she'd flip it, tell me I'd been paranoid and distant and that I'd pushed her to this. Without evidence, without documentation, I'd be trapped arguing against a story she'd have time to perfect before I got home. He suggested something that made my stomach turn at first: build a fake profile, send her a match, and let her reveal herself to a stranger. Catfishing my own wife. It felt beneath me. It felt dishonest. And then Tom said something that I've thought about many times since. You're not creating the betrayal, Carter. You're just giving it somewhere to go. I took screenshots of everything before we left the oak tree. Her photographs, her profile text. The timestamp showing the account had been active at 8:47 that morning. I forwarded every image to a private email account Savannah had no access to. When I walked back into the house, she was in the kitchen. Eggs on the stove, radio on low, hair still damp from the shower she'd taken while maintaining an active dating profile. She looked up and smiled and asked what Tom had wanted. Football, I said. I'd never deliberately lied to my wife before that moment. What surprised me was how easily the word came, smooth and quiet, like it had been waiting there all along. What? I spent the following 48 hours learning how to become a stranger. Tom and I worked carefully, using legally licensed stock photographs and building out several different profiles across 3 platforms, different ages, different professions, different personalities designed to appeal to whatever version of herself Savannah was marketing on those apps. Most of them produced nothing. No match, no reaction, no signal. Then on Wednesday afternoon, one of them connected. His name was Michael, 41 years old, recently divorced, commercial photographer. And at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday, while I was sitting at my desk with machinery humming in the testing room behind me, the screen on my phone read, "It's a match." I sat with that notification for a long time. I didn't move. People walked past my office door, someone laughed in the hallway, the building went on existing around me as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Not the fact of the betrayal, I already knew that. What shifted was something colder, something in the architecture of who I thought we were together. My wife, in our home, with my ring on her finger, had swiped right on a man I'd invented. I let her lead the conversation. That was deliberate. I kept Michael curious but unhurried, and Savannah came forward on her own, the way people do when they believe they're in control of what's being revealed. She told Michael she'd been single for almost a year. She said her previous relationship had ended because her partner was emotionally unavailable. I read those words at my desk while the coffee she'd made me that morning was still sitting cold in a mug on the corner of my desk. At night, I'd sit on the couch beside her, our shoulders almost touching, and I'd watch her pick up her phone and smile at the screen. She thought she was flirting with a stranger. She was reading words I'd written in Tom's spare bedroom 2 houses away. She told me that she felt trapped, that she deserved excitement, that her husband, whom she described as an ex to make the lie easier to maintain, was predictable and incapable of passion, that she'd wasted years of her life on comfort. I want to be honest about what that did to me. I'd expected anger. What I hadn't expected was this particular kind of grief, reading your own obituary written by someone who shared your bed that morning. I expanded the investigation beyond the phone. I pulled our joint financial statements, transactions I had every legal right to review, and started building a timeline. Restaurant charges on evenings she said she'd been visiting a friend from yoga, rideshare trips to parts of the city she'd never mentioned, 2 hotel deposits she'd categorized in our budgeting app as household supplies. I didn't access any private accounts. I stayed strictly within what was legally mine to see. A synced photo notification on our shared tablet did some of the work for me. Images appeared Savannah had deleted from her phone but hadn't cleared from the cloud backup we'd set up together years ago. No explicit photographs, but enough: cocktails at a hotel bar, a sweet interior, the sleeve of a man's jacket against a white tablecloth. The metadata attached to each image was precise. Dates, times. Every single one matched an evening she'd had a reason to be somewhere else. Through Michael, I asked whether she'd done this before. I kept the question casual, like a man who admired her boldness rather than one who was documenting the answer. She told me she had, said she'd become quite good at it, said her husband was too trusting to notice. That sentence was the last thing I needed. My pain, which had been grief up to that point, became something else, colder, more purposeful. I wasn't trying to save the marriage any longer. I was preparing to leave it in a way that didn't let her rewrite what she'd done. The following Tuesday, Michael asked Savannah to meet him in person. She chose the Birchwood Cafe. He agreed. She sent a heart. I walked home from Tom's house, undressed in the bathroom, and got into bed next to my wife. She was already asleep. I lay in the dark and listened to her breathe, and I thought about the corner table she'd reserved. Before I agreed to meet Savannah at the Birchwood Cafe as Michael, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. A senior colleague had recommended her months earlier in an unrelated context, and I'd stored the name in the back of my mind the way you store information you never expect to use. Now I sat across from her desk and laid out everything I had. She was measured and direct in the way I needed her to be. She explained that a dating profile on its own wouldn't automatically strip Savannah of marital assets. Sentiment wasn't a legal instrument. I couldn't lock Savannah out of the house, empty the joint accounts, or hide money without exposing myself to consequences that would undermine everything else I was trying to accomplish. The attorney told me that if I wanted to walk away from this marriage with my life intact, I needed to be as disciplined in the legal process as I had been in the investigation. That advice reshaped everything. My goal wasn't to punish Savannah by burning down our finances. My goal was to ensure she received exactly what the law required, nothing more, nothing manufactured on her behalf by 12 years of my silence. I handed over the screenshots, the financial statements, the hotel transactions, and the chat logs in which Savannah had told a stranger that her husband was too trusting to notice. The attorney identified several of Savannah's affair-related expenditures as potential marital fund dissipation, money spent maintaining a secret life using shared resources. That distinction mattered. I opened an individual account and redirected my future paychecks to it. I changed passwords on my personal email and my work systems. I froze our joint credit card from further increases while continuing to cover the normal household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, so that nothing about my behavior at home gave anything away. I photographed every item of value in the house. I pulled copies of our tax returns, the mortgage documents, the insurance policies, and the retirement statements, and I sent digital copies to my attorney's secure server. I did all of this on lunch breaks and weekend mornings while Savannah slept in. Tom identified one of the men from a reflection caught in the background of a hotel photo, a partially visible face in a mirror that Savannah apparently hadn't noticed. His name was Eric Vance, married, sales manager at a regional distribution company. He'd been at a neighborhood charity event the previous autumn. I had a photograph of him shaking my hand. I called Eric's wife, Melissa, and I was careful about how I did it. I didn't deliver a verdict. I sent her enough information that she could verify things herself and told her she deserved to know. 3 days later, she called me back. Eric had admitted to meeting Savannah 3 times over 4 months, and Melissa had screenshots from Eric's phone in which Savannah mocked the husband who was financing her lifestyle while she looked for excitement elsewhere. Those screenshots were, legally speaking, a third-party corroboration that Savannah's activities weren't fantasy. They made the dating profile harder to dismiss as role play or a misunderstanding. My attorney filed the divorce petition. We requested temporary financial orders. I arranged with a property management company to handle Savannah's access to the house after the confrontation through a documented written agreement. No illegal lockout, no missing furniture, no ammunition for her to use against me. I prepared one folder for Savannah, printed, physical. Inside it, the chat logs, the hotel transaction records, the photographs with their metadata, Eric's admission, Melissa's screenshot. And the first page of the filed divorce petition. I thought briefly about sending her family a message, posting something publicly, letting everyone know at once. My attorney advised against it, public exposure creates legal complexity and it gives the other side something to be the victim of. The disclosure would be narrow: Savannah, her parents, Eric's wife, and the courts. Controlled, documented, irreversible. On the morning of the meeting, Savannah told me she was having lunch with a former classmate. I kissed her forehead and told her to enjoy herself. After she left, I opened the folder one last time, removed my wedding ring, and placed it inside the inner pocket. At 1:45 p.m., Michael messaged Savannah that he was on his way to the cafe. She replied immediately. She was already at the corner table, waiting. I called Tom. "It's time," I said. "What?" The Birchwood Cafe smells like dark roast coffee and warm pastry, and under any other circumstances, I might have found it pleasant. I noticed the hiss of the espresso machine first, then a child at the table nearest the window tapping a spoon rhythmically against a glass, oblivious in content. Ordinary things. The world proceeding as though nothing unusual was about to happen. Savannah was at the corner table exactly as she'd promised Michael she would be. She'd worn a blouse I'd never seen, cream-colored, new, and the perfume she once told me had been discontinued. She'd taken care with her appearance in a way she rarely did on a Sunday afternoon with me. She was checking her reflection in her phone screen when Tom and I walked through the door together. She looked toward the entrance expecting a photographer named Michael. She saw her husband instead. The sequence of emotions that crossed her face in those first 3 seconds was something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Confusion came first, because the mind reaches for explanations before it reaches for the truth. Then something closer to recognition, and with recognition came fear, not the sharp, immediate fear of someone caught in a minor lie, but the cold, settling fear of someone who understands in an instant that the ground has disappeared beneath them. Tom, following behind me, closed the door on any possibility that this was a coincidence. I sat down across from her and said, "You looked different in your profile." She started talking immediately. That was the first thing she did, she talked. She said the account was a joke, that her friends had made it, that she'd only come to the cafe because she thought she was meeting a coworker. She said she'd never intended for anything to happen. The explanations came quickly, fluently, with a practiced ease that told me this wasn't the first time she'd constructed a cover story under pressure. I let her talk. I let her build the structure of the lie completely, commit to it fully, so there was no room later to claim she'd been misunderstood or cut off before she could explain. Then I placed my phone on the table and opened the conversation between Savannah and Michael. She looked at the screen and the color left her face. There were her words, her intimate, careful, privately thrilling words, staring back at her from the phone of the man she'd been lying to for 8 years. She reached for the phone. I pulled it back. She said she'd never met anyone, said it was just messages, just conversation, just something she did to feel less invisible. I placed the folder on the table. She opened it slowly, the way you open something when you already know it's going to be terrible. The hotel charges, the photographs with their timestamps and metadata. Eric Vance's name and his admission, corroborated by his wife. Melissa's screenshots. And beneath all of it, the first page of the divorce petition already filed. The denial collapsed. What replaced it was something messier, a series of deflections thrown at the wall in rapid succession. She blamed Tom for interfering in our marriage. She blamed my work schedule, the hours I spent at the office, the emotional distance she claimed I'd created. She said we'd stopped talking years ago. She said she'd been lonely. She said the affairs, and she used the plural herself, which told me more than she intended had happened because I'd stopped seeing her. I waited until she finished. Then I told her that she had years, 8 years of marriage, 3 years before that, in which she could have told me she was unhappy and walked away honestly. Instead, she used my house, my income, and my name as a backdrop for a life I wasn't invited to. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She asked me to come home, said we could work through this together privately without lawyers. I told her there was nothing left to discuss privately. My attorney would handle all further communication, and arrangements for her access to the house would be made in writing. Then I told her the last thing, the piece she hadn't seen coming, the detail that made everything else land differently. Michael didn't exist. Every compliment that had made her lean forward over her phone, every private admission she'd typed into the dark. Every fantasy she'd constructed around a divorced photographer who made her feel seen, she'd been having that conversation with me. The husband she'd described as an ex. The man she called too predictable to notice. Savannah began crying, not quietly, the kind of crying that turns heads in a public place. Other customers glanced toward our table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call her names or lean across the table. I sat straight, spoke calmly, and said everything I needed to say in measured, complete sentences. My composure was the most devastating thing I could have offered her in that moment, because it left her with nothing to accuse me of later. No instability, no threats, no behavior to reframe in her favor. Before I stood, I told her to look in the inner pocket of the folder. She reached inside and found my wedding ring. I pushed back my chair and said, "You told Michael your life was finally your own. Now it is." Tom and I walked out through the front door together. Behind me, Savannah remained at the corner table, the one she'd reserved for a stranger, surrounded by the careful, documented evidence of everything she'd destroyed. The divorce didn't resolve itself cleanly in a week the way confrontations do in the stories we tell ourselves. It took 6 months, and those months were neither quiet nor straightforward. Savannah cycled through phases like whether first she sent long, pleading messages about reconciliation, about therapy, about how she'd throw everything away if I'd just come home and talk to her. Then when the attorney-to-attorney communications made it clear that I wasn't going to answer her messages personally, she shifted into something harder. She called it entrapment. She sent a message to Tom accusing him of engineering my emotional breakdown. She called my parents once, and only once, before my mother told her politely and permanently to stop. I forwarded every message to my attorney and stopped responding directly. Because we had no children, the custody negotiations that complicate most divorces didn't apply. That was one of the rare places where Savannah's repeated delays worked against her. There were no children to negotiate over, no arrangement requiring ongoing contact, no reason for our lives to remain entangled after the paperwork was signed. The house was sold. It didn't feel like a loss the way I expected it to. What I'd lived in for 6 years had already become a place I didn't recognize, and selling it felt more like closing a door I'd already stopped standing in front of. Savannah received her lawful portion of the marital equity, but the documented affair-related expenditures, the hotel stays categorized as household supplies, the rideshare trips, the restaurant charges, factored into the financial negotiations. The attorney had been clear from the beginning. This was about ensuring the settlement was accurate, not inflated by transactions Savannah had made against our shared interests. Savannah's request for long-term spousal support was the part she seemed most confident about. She argued that she had sacrificed her professional development for the marriage, that she'd stepped back from the workforce to support our household. My attorney put into evidence every funded course she had voluntarily abandoned, along with her own statements, in the chat logs with Michael, about being healthy, spontaneous, and ready to start fresh. A career she described as something she'd chose to set aside was difficult to frame as something taken from her. The final agreement included limited transitional support rather than permanent maintenance. I called Savannah's parents myself the week before they would have heard her version. Her father picked up. I spoke without exaggeration and without venom, and I sent only the evidence necessary to explain why the marriage was ending. What I was owed from that conversation was honesty. Her father listened, and there was a long silence on his end when I finished. He apologized. He said he hoped I'd be well. He told Savannah, I learned later, that she could stay with them temporarily, but that she needed to find work and her own place to live. Eric Vance's life came apart along a parallel track. Melissa had already filed for divorce by the time ours was finalized. Eric's employer initiated an internal review after company travel records revealed that several of his business trips had included personal detours inconsistent with his stated itineraries. Carter had not filed a complaint. He hadn't needed to. The records existed. The truth had its own momentum. Eric didn't lose his job, but he lost the promotion he'd been tracking toward for 2 years, and the internal review remained part of his employment file in a W. That would follow him. His marriage was over. His reputation in our neighborhood, had been permanently revised. Savannah's social circle fragmented the way those things do. Some friends rallied publicly, posting vague sentiments about standing by her through a difficult time. Privately, they began maintaining a careful distance. Others told me, when I saw them in passing in the weeks after everything became known, that they'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't known what to say. I thanked them for telling me and quietly removed them from the version of my life I was rebuilding. There's a particular kind of silence that's a form of complicity, and I've stopped making space for it. Savannah eventually took a studio apartment above a laundromat 12 miles from the house we once shared. She started waiting tables at a highway diner. I'm not saying this to diminish her. I'm saying it because she had told a stranger, sitting across from me at that corner table, that she deserved excitement and that she was finally ready to live her own life. I wanted her to know that the offer stands. A life entirely her own, without the man she called predictable, without the mortgage he paid, without the income that funded the blouses and the hotel rooms and the persona of a single woman with no expectations. She was not left destitute, but the life she had treated as a permanent arrangement, as something that would simply continue regardless of what she did inside it, was gone. I bought a smaller house closer to work. It takes me 14 minutes to drive there in the mornings. The rooms are quieter than the old house, and for a while that quiet had a texture to it, something between loneliness and peace that I couldn't quite name. Eventually, I decided it was honesty. The silence was honest, and that turned out to be enough. Months later, I drove past the Birchwood Cafe on the way home from a late shift. The lights were on inside, and I could see the corner tables from the street. I thought about stopping. I kept driving. People have a particular expectation for stories like this one. They want the betrayed husband to end up either triumphantly in love again, a better woman a second chance, proof that the story was really just a prologue, or they want him wrapped in the warm conclusion of having one. A clean ledger, a villain punished, a moral delivered. My story doesn't end that way. I lost the house where I'd planned to grow old. I lost 11 years of a version of my life that turned out to be partly fictional. I lost several people I'd thought of as friends, people who admitted later that they'd suspected and said nothing, which taught me something about the difference between witnesses and accomplices. And even after the settlement favored me, even after the documents were signed and the evidence preserved, and the truth laid out in a folder on a corner table in a cafe she'd chosen herself, I don't wake up every morning feeling like a man who won something. Some nights I wake remembering what it felt like to lie in the dark beside her while she slept, untroubled, and I think about all the things I believed were real in that silence. The plans we made, the renovation we never got around to, the conversation about children we kept postponing. But here is the difference now. I don't question what happened. I don't wonder whether I imagined it, whether I misunderstood, whether I was too cold or too absent or too reliable in the wrong direction. Savannah had calculated very precisely on that trust of mine, counted on it the way you count on a structural element, something load-bearing that holds everything else up. She had assumed that once discovered, there would be tears and confusion and a husband who doubted himself enough to be managed. She got something different. I gave her exactly what she had advertised for on that profile, a life without me. No mortgage I paid, no home I maintained, no husband too predictable to notice. I pass the Birchwood Cafe sometimes. I never stop. She went to that cafe hoping to meet a stranger. By the time I walked out, that was exactly what I had become.